Hello, hello. Alright, I'm gonna talk now. Madam Microwave, Mr. Toaster, friends of the podcast, Tiger Blanket, and my fellow listeners. We meet tonight at a moment of unlimited potential. As we enter year 2 of the podcast, I stand here ready to work with you to create a historically popular podcast for all people, from Baltimore to Boston, or Beantown, as I like to call it, to Oregon, to Chicago, to Winnipeg, to Vancouver, and far beyond. At least 5 to 10 people, and that's an aggressive estimate, will watch this address as I am gathered in this amazing kitchen here at 817 St. Paul Street, hoping that I can lead us to podcasting prosperity, not as a disorganized group of listeners, but as one true friends of the podcast. That line still needs some work. The agenda I will lay out this evening is not a Republican agenda nor a Democratic agenda. In fact, it has nothing to do with politics. That would be lame. When I began this podcast over 1 year ago, I campaigned on 4 core promises. Comedy in the age of misinformation. World-class intro and outro music to make your ears bleed. Scintillating interviews with even more scintillating guests. And a series of historic tours and projects, including a 9-week fall tour, a Beantown Unplugged concert series, and a live episode from Alaska, or the natural state, as I like to call it, and they said it couldn't be done. There is new opportunity here for the Beantown podcast, if only we have the courage to seize it. Victory is not winning for our party. However, I will be in Chicago for my birthday, which is March 16th, if anyone out there is interested in planning a surprise party. Victory is winning for our podcast. This year, the podcast will recognize one very important anniversary that shows us the majesty of this show's mission and the power of the friends of the podcast. Currently, right now, in February 2019, we're celebrating our 2nd annual Pledge Drive fundraiser in a broad, sweeping effort to support the arts, local business, and the communities that make our podcast great. Last year, as part of a grassroots, fledgling word-of-mouth effort in hopes of launching our podcast on SoundCloud and by extension iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, and many other places, we raised over $70 in what could only be seen at the time as a significant success. This year, I'm proud to announce that now in the 6th day of the Pledge Drive fundraiser, we have not only hit our goal of $235, but we've surpassed it and will continue to throughout the month of February. In less than 1 week alone, we have gone where no podcast has gone before. And thanks to the introduction of donor tier incentives, our fellow friends of the podcast will now be equally awarded for their generous giving. With your support, we will not only be able to continue our unlimited hosting of podcast installments via SoundCloud, but we will also launch, for the first time ever, the very first ever BeantownPodcast.com, now in its beta stage. Thanks to your generous donations, the podcast will now be more open and available to every man, woman, child, and SoundCloud bot that is interested in filling their life with C-grade comedy and high-level misinformation. In addition to hosting our extremely popular podcasts, this new website will also be home to our newest special creation, the Beantown blog. Many have said that in this day and age, or the digital age, as I call it, there is no need for the written word. Why should we even teach handwriting in schools anymore? Why even own a typewriter? I scoff. The Beantown blog will now be the preeminent place for all of my thoughts, predictions, rants, and other musings. No longer will you have to rely on social media's twisted and horribly unfair algorithms to find my material. Together, we are greater. Now, with these new tools in front of us, we must step boldly and bravely into the next chapter of this great global adventure, and we must create a new standard of comedy for the 21st century. An amazing quality of humor is well within reach for all of our listeners. Together, we can fill our listeners' homes with laughter or hatred, depending on whether or not you like the show. We can also greatly enhance our middle class through trickle-down podcastnomics. By giving to the podcast, you will in turn receive the comedical benefits of year 2 of the Beantown podcast. And those benefits are going to be magnificent. Just you wait. We must reject well-produced and well-known podcasts and embrace the limitless potential of average humor, home pride Oregon ads, and far below average singing. We must choose between humor and hysteria, greatness or greediness, love or laziness, kick-ass comedy or crumbling crap. In just over 1 year as a podcast, my show has brought in the revolution of podcasting and podcasters, with there being an estimated 525,000 active podcasts currently in existence. That number was certainly not as high as when we began, I can assure you. More importantly, we've created jobs with positions like creator, host, best boy, writer, key grip, and caterers, all being filled by yours truly. They said we couldn't do it. We're just getting started. We went on a mini spring tour with stops including beautiful places like Memphis, Tennessee, where we sat by the banks of the Mississippi River and ate Gibson's Donuts. Now, how many other podcasts do you know that could pull that off? We visited the beautiful city of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, where we were stood up by friend of the podcast and creator of Places in Chicago, Joaquin Nolasco. Yet despite the setback, we gave you a live show regardless. Who says we don't care about coal country anymore? We introduced the Beantown Unplugged series, with episodes featuring amazing songs from friends of the podcast Jack Furness and Matthew Fiedler. We took a personal day in the beautiful state of Delaware, or the natural state, as I like to call it, and visited our amazing military at the Naval Academy in Annapolis. We embarked upon a grueling 9-week fall tour, not because it was easy, but because you, the fans, demanded it. And in turn, we demand greatness from ourselves. Whether struggling to open a bottle of wine with a coat hanger in the beautiful city of Chicago, or touring the amazing Badlands live from Sioux Falls, or visiting the wonderful rolling hills of Bowling Green, Kentucky, we made it our mission to bring you, the friends of the podcast, a podcast you could be proud of. We also recognize that while we are best known for being your one-stop shop for misinformation, Beantown can also be so much more than that. Thanks to our friend of the podcast, Matthew Fiedler, all of our listeners learn not only how to file your taxes in this scary day and age when ICE and the IRS are oftentimes after us, but we also learned about what a Form 5498 is and just how important those can be to saving for retirement. Thanks to friend of the podcast, Maggie J., we learned that going to grad school isn't for everyone. Through this interview, I made it my number one priority for at least 2 hours to improve the state of mental health for the listeners of this podcast, and I'm proud to share the strides we've made towards achieving this goal. Because of the contributions from my own family, Steve, Jane, Walter, Kelly, Jack, Abby, Grandma Sal, and Grandpa Dave, we were able to come together in healing at a time when this listener base was hurt and broken. Because of the roast of Quinn David Furness, we managed to not only provide laughter to, at last count, 136 listeners, but we also managed to archive the voices of countless dear friends of the podcast. No one has benefited from the first year of the Beantown podcast more than women, where women fill more than or less than 50% of all the new listeners we attracted this year. Pretty spectacular, if you ask me. All friends of the podcast can be proud that we have more women listeners than ever before, and exactly 1 century after the United States passed the 19th Amendment giving women the right to vote, an amendment which I defended fervently live on air, much to the chagrin of our enemies. We are stronger than ever. Still, in this day and age, there is much left to accomplish. While the creation of our new website is a strong step in the right direction, it is up to us to continue to nurture and foster this beautiful new product. Audio quality remains a hot topic of discussion. While the Samsung Q2U series has been a valiant sponsor in our first year, we must continue to improve in our quest for greatness. To this end, we will continue to seek out newer and stronger Samsung models, because when God speaks, he uses a Samsung. Podcast revenue remains another obstacle standing in our way. While we've done the occasional advertising spot for smaller businesses in the past, such as places in Chicago, finding a long-term corporate partner to offer us more financial stability remains an elusive pursuit. Thankfully, there are those like the Samsung Q2U series, as well as Home Pride Oregon, Central Oregon's hottest new home inspection service, to keep us afloat in these trying times. Jack Links, this is my call to you. Finally, our largest hurdle continues to be growing our listener and subscriber base in order to bring laughter to many more people and spread misinformation far and wide across the globe. While initiatives like the 2019 Pledge Drive fundraiser and the introduction of international subscribers, such as our friends from Canada in Winnipeg and Vancouver, as well as our African friend of the podcast, Mr. Rock Chris, who may or may not be Chris Rock and is a resident of Burkina Faso, they show us that we are trending in the right direction. But there's always more we can do to strengthen our brand abroad. To this end, there are those out there who seek to divide us by building walls and burning bridges. Some will say, "Wow, Quinn, you don't have very many subscribers." Others will say, "We listen to your stuff, we just don't think it's funny." Yet we will not be deterred. There's room for Beantown in everyone, if only we choose to keep our hearts open. So tonight, I ask you to stand with us and choose whether we are defined by our differences or whether we dare to rise above them. We must choose whether we are simply listeners or whether we are true friends of the podcast. We will forge ahead into the unknown, spreading misinformation and greatness as only we know how. After all, greatness is all we know. This is our future. This is our vision. It's been one crazy heck of a ride in our first year. And as we grow bigger, better, and stronger, I'm asking that you stay on this ride with us. No matter the obstacle, together we shall endure. Thank you. God bless you. God bless the podcast. And good night.